Hi, everyone, and welcome to another session of You Can Thrive in SPED 3, where I have with me Jen Adams talking to us today about errorless learning. And I have to say, Jen, up front, thank you for having a nice, easily pronounced name.
I didn't always. I married into a nice one.
And she usually works the opposite.
Yeah. I lucked out. Well, that was one of my goals. I said, it has to be an easy name because I struggled all through my childhood.
No kidding. One, so. Well, good for you. Well, welcome. And I'm so glad you're here to teach us about this, what to some people is a pretty new concept. I suppose it's been around a while, but a lot of people are really unfamiliar with it. So I'm glad you're going to be teaching us.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about you for those of you who are meeting you for the first time?
All right. So my name is Jen Adams. I'm a certified special education, elementary, and early childhood educator. I have my first years in education. I was actually elementary and early childhood teacher. I worked in first grade and pre-kindergarten, and then took a spin and decided to go into special ed. Saw a lot of students that needed that support in special education in the regular education classroom, and thought to myself, well, if I'm going to get a master's in something, I want something that's going to help the most students possible. So I went with the special education route. During that time, I taught a year in an alternative education setting with disruptive youth. And then also my most recent years of experience are in a self-contained autistic support classroom. I have 8 years of teaching experience, 7 of those in brick and mortar, and this past year in a virtual cyber charter school. So I've kind of done what everybody else has done, that whole virtual piece, flying by the seat of your pants, trying to figure out what you're doing.
Yeah.
And that's been a new, interesting adventure as well. So as much as you can hope to find your comfort zone in education, they really don't let you. It's what I've learned.
I think that's one of the nice things about special education, Jen, though, is that we can do more than one thing with our license. Yeah. And so for a lot of us, it keeps us going to switch it up every now and again. So good for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and then I've taken a lot of time to focus on behavior intervention, working with students with significant behavior and needing that support. And then I'm in the current process of going to get my principal certification to see where that can lead me one day. And then I also have a lot of extensive training in supporting families and students with using AAC and helping with communication. So.
Okay. Well, I'm going to let you jump right into the topic because 30 minutes goes fast.
All right. Sounds good. So today I wanted to share with you about errorless learning. And errorless learning is an antecedent intervention that helps to minimize student error. Now, when I say an antecedent intervention, antecedent, if you're familiar with ABC, when we talk about behavior and data, the antecedent is the before. So what happens before a student needs intervention? So this is a strategy that you can use with your students before they make a mistake to help minimize their chances of making a mistake. Now, the reason that this is an important thing to do is that it can help build students' confidence. So we know we struggle with things in our lives and it can be a little frustrating. So this is a great way to ensure that the students are always responding correctly and getting those answers right when they're working, which is also going to build their confidence, make them feel better about what they're doing, feel more confident to continue working on that skill, and it increases their knowledge at the same time. The other thing that you can really do with errorless learning is you can work with the student to help reduce the need for prompts. And I will get more in depth about what prompting is if you've never heard of prompting before. Some of us are familiar with that hierarchy of prompts, and I plan to share about that in my presentation as well. But reducing those prompts for students, meaning that extra support we're providing them in order to be successful, is also something you can do with errorless learning and kind of a basis of where you could start to decrease that support to help them be more independent.
So, Jen, when I first heard of errorless teaching or errorless learning, it's just been like within the last year, and I have 31 years in education, and so I was really intrigued to start kind of finding out what it was. And then after meeting with you and learning more, as a parent of a special needs child who was in life skills, I so wish that my son's teachers had known about this method, because he would have been so much more successful and had so much more joy at his school time because he could move things from point A to point B, but he couldn't match things. And it didn't matter how hard they were, he couldn't match things. So I love it. And so when you get more into it, maybe my comment will make more sense. But
So what students can actually benefit from errorless learning? Honestly, any student can benefit from errorless learning. Us as adults can benefit from it when we're learning a new skill.
Amen.
Really, yeah, right? Really, it's great for students who become easily frustrated. So if you know of a student that the second they sense they're going to get an answer wrong, or the second that they know that something's just getting a little too hard and they want to break down, this is a skill you want or a strategy you want to use with that student. It's also great for students that don't grasp information and they need a long period of time to do it. So a lot of my experience working with students with significant disabilities, it takes them a while to learn a skill. And so if we're working on it errorlessly, I'm providing them the repetition of completing that skill correctly. And we all know the more repetitions that a student does or a child does or any of us do in something, the better we get at it. So if we're doing it correctly more and more and more, we're more likely to learn that skill in the long run. And then students who require those high levels of prompting to be successful need support, whether it's hand over hand, whether it's a gesture they need. Any students that need those levels of prompting to continue working or to answer a question can also benefit from errorless learning. So again, like I said, the benefits of errorless learning is that repetition of errorless learning that helps to increase student success. The two big takeaways I want you to take from today is that you're going to take away the frustration for your students if you use errorless learning, and you're going to build their confidence. And both of these are great motivators for anyone, but for our students specifically. So I told you we would get into this. What is prompting? So I talked a little bit about how errorless learning is a great way to reduce the amount of prompting we're giving a student. And prompting is when the instructor engages in encouraging the desired response from a learner. So we might do that in many different ways. And you can see I have a little chart here that gives you many different types of prompts that we might provide a student. We go from the one that is most inclusion, meaning the most that we're providing that student might be a full physical prompt. So if a student needs to move, say, a piece on a file folder, we are actually holding onto their hand with that piece and moving it over to put it onto that. That would be a full physical. Partial physical might be I might prop the student's elbow to go towards that piece to pick it up. Modeling, of course, is what you would think it is. I'm actually showing the student how to do it first and then they do it. Gestural might be I might point to the object that I want them to pick up. Verbal is I'm giving a verbal cue, pick up that piece. And visual can also have to do with maybe where I position my body, but also visual if I hold up a card that maybe has an instruction on it and the student follows it. So you can go from the most helpful or most invasive to the least when you're learning a new skill. That's typically the route you want to go. So when you're doing errorless learning, you might be using a lot of those physical promptings with your students, but eventually we want them to not need any of that prompting. So in order to do that, we can fade out those prompts so that those students don't become dependent on us to do that skill. And that can be a lot more easily done when you're learning errorlessly, meaning they can't make a mistake. And then we can decrease that level of prompting to kind of help that student move forward.
I love that, Jen. It makes me think of even most of my experiences with higher functioning kids with learning disabilities or other health impairments like ADHD, traumatic brain injury, that kind of thing. And so even at that level, we worked so hard to get the independence there. So many of them, by the time they got to junior high, acted like they couldn't do a thing unless they had like a para right next to them. And you're like, that's not real life. That's not going to keep going with you. And so even though I didn't know errorless learning was a thing, we implemented some of that in order to get the kids to try to be independent. So I love that it really does work with all students that need to learn something.
Absolutely. Yes. I've noticed most of my years teaching in self-contained special ed has been with a middle school population of students. And that's really where I was noticing that dependency upon someone else in order to do things was a detriment to the child. A lot of times in elementary
by that time.
Right. And they learn that someone's going to help them. So then that learned helplessness comes into play. And the student is just like, well, somebody else is going to help me do it. I don't need to, tie my own shoe. Someone else is going to do that for me. And then we get to the point where they're old enough that people expect them to do those things, but they can't, because instead of teaching them that skill from a very young age and understanding that, yes, it's going to take a lot of repetition, maybe with this child to learn it, we started too late. And then we're struggling, in those middle school and high school years to do some things that really we could have tackled maybe in elementary school. So using errorless learning can be used in all different, I'm going to show a lot of materials that you can use for errorless learning in my next few slides here, but I can think of using it in tons of ways, like I just mentioned, tying your shoes, buttoning your shirt, and really providing a lot of times a lot of physical prompting, hand over hand and things like that to get it done. But there's lots of ways to use errorless learning outside of the classroom in more practical life skill settings too. So what I have here on this first slide, I'm going to show you a couple different examples of some errorless learning materials that you might find useful or spark some ideas for you of things. I know for me, when I was first in my classroom, I had no idea what errorless learning was. And so I was kind of like, well, what do those materials even look like? How would I make something for a student? What's the structure of that? So I wanted to share what that would look like, to give you some ideas of some different ways you might use materials in an errorless way. And then I promise you, it will probably get your wheels turning a bit about some things that maybe you already have in your classroom that you can turn into errorless opportunities for your students.
Yes, Jen, because there are a lot of misconceptions out there. Me being one of the people that had huge misconceptions, I was like, what's the point? Like,
right.
If all the answers are right, like, what's that look like? Ooh, how hard can that be? But no, they're beautiful. I love it. You have won me over.
So the first image there on the left, it looks like it's an adapted book. So if you're familiar with adapted books, typically it's got like a sentence on the page, a couple pictures on it, and typically it might have answers on the side that are all different. So to make this errorless, every single answer is the same. You can see we have the sign for the word more on it. This is actually a communication adapted book that I use in my classroom with my students who utilize AAC. I have also used it with my students that are learning sight words. So getting that repetition of seeing that sight word over and over and over again, because every page has that same answer. Now, if I was teaching this skill with a student, I would have the book with them. And whether they could verbally tell me what the word was or they needed to use an AAC or assistive technology device, I would have them tell me what it was as they answered on every page. So I might read that sentence, I want more tissues, and then I'd say, what is the word? And then they'd find the word more, grab it off there, stick it on there, and then I'd have them tell me the word. So they're really getting it in multiple modes with this type of a setup, which is nice too. They get to verbally practice saying it. They get to physically move it over. They hear me saying the word. So we're also kind of getting into that multi-modal learning as well with that. And with AAC learners, anybody that's using assistive technology, speech-generated devices, that repetitions for our students to first learn that language is really important. So doing it errorlessly is a great way to give them that success without getting frustrated when they're first learning how to use it. And then the second picture I have there is actually a morning meeting material that I use in my classroom where we just talk about the days of the week, the months of the year. But as you can see, the student's holding just one big piece that has that day on it. And I think it says tomorrow will be on the binder. So tomorrow will be Tuesday. I don't have 5 other days of the week on there. I just have Tuesday. Now, I will say up front, for setting up materials for something like that, is it a little time consuming to make sure all the right answers are on those pages every single day? It is. However, I was able to get it into part of my paraprofessionals' daily routines of things that they did. And actually in the older grades, I actually had a student I would find every year that liked to put the pieces back, and that became a classroom job. So, sometimes people will say, oh, that's so much work to do that. but I was able to turn it into a classroom job. And I had one student that would lay all the binders out at the end of the day when we did jobs the last half hour of the day, and he would put all the pieces that were right for the other kids that needed it.
Brilliant.
So yeah, so that was a big help for sure.
Yes,
in getting
I'm
all that
loving
set
that, because my people know that I'm all about saving time without sacrificing effectiveness. And so
Right.
What a beautiful way you found to get kids to practice a task they needed to task, which helped you be more prepared to teach and your students prepared to learn, taking you less time. Win-win.
So I always used to say, we got to put them to work, got to keep them busy. So with these next two, you're going to see these are more academic type concepts that you could use in any classroom. Doesn't have to be, self-contained special education. I could see these materials used in a kindergarten classroom, a first grade classroom. So the first one there is a file folder, and it just has place the alphabet here. So any letter would work. So all of the letters can go on there, and as long as they put a letter on there, they get it right. And if all the pieces are letters, they're not getting it wrong. Could you totally expand this? Of course, you could hold up the letter and say, what sound does this letter make? What letter is it? You could put letters together and say, okay, if I put a C and an H together, what do you get? And go with your blends and digraphs and totally expand from there with this. I even have gone the route of throwing some pieces in once they've mastered this as outliers. So some numbers, some shapes. Do they really know which ones are the alphabet, or are they just going through the motions? So yes, errorless is going to start very simple, but it's very easy to take some of these errorless materials and ideas and bump them up a notch when you notice that student is ready to do that. And then the next one is a worksheet, just a simple cut and paste worksheet. And instead of there being 8 different coins on the page, they're all quarters. So they're all working on the same skill. You cannot get the answer wrong. All the pieces say quarter. Again, if you want to make it a little harder, you could throw a couple in there that have dime or nickel written on them. You could, change the picture so that it's not all quarters on the page if your student is ready to go to that level. But I often found that when I was teaching coins and maybe their faces and their values and their names in my classroom, I had to go one at a time. So first we learned the penny. Then we learned the nickel. So having these errorless materials that focus on such a minute skill, which if you look out there, there really aren't a ton of materials that focus that minute on some of these skills, especially learning coins. A lot of them, it's all the coins together, which is super overwhelming for our students a lot of the time. This was something that I really liked to do with them to really hone in on that one skill.
And it just makes me feel, Jen, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but that a student who does that quarter paper and somebody says, such a great job, you got all the quarters matched, then when you do hand them one that has quarters and dimes, they're willing to try it because they've had that earlier success.
Absolutely. And you're kind of giving me an idea here, but just that routine of cutting it out, putting the pieces on, you're teaching all those skills. So somebody might say, but are we really teaching them anything? You're teaching them how to cut. You're teaching them how to paste. You're teaching them that when they see a box with, that's where the piece belongs. You're teaching them that the piece goes next to the picture it matches. All of those early skills that sometimes we forget that maybe our students miss and just don't have. I can't tell you how many times in my middle school classroom, I would realize I had a student that had no idea how to cut. They didn't know the line at the top of the paper was where their name was because it was never expected of them. They just all through their teaching. And it's not because the teachers didn't do their job. It's just, they just never had to write their name at the top. So, some of those just directional skills can be learned throughout this process is moving left to right. So if you want to take those alphabet pieces and make sure they're always on one side and work on those left to right skills, those fine motor and gross motor skills. I mean, the things that you're doing in this, sometimes I feel like we don't give ourselves enough credit in education for all the things our students are actually accomplishing when they do something. And sometimes you have to kind of take a step back and think about what they're doing, because sometimes for us, it just becomes that like muscle memory. We're so used to it, but they are doing some great things.
And unfortunately, our standardized testing system kind of drives us to be that way. And our administrators come in and say, well, what was the point of that? How's that going to help them on the test?
Right.
And we all know there's more than school to the test, and we're not trying to make them great test takers. But the bottom line is the funding is on it, and so it's going to come up. And so it's in the back of our heads all of the time. But when we really know in special education, the power is that we get to focus on true personalized learning and an individualized education plan. And I'm sorry, I just cannot help thinking of my son and how he would have loved, like that alphabet one, he would have loved that. Just that anyone he picked is right, and somebody would smile instead of somebody saying, try this one, and move his hand over to the one that's right. I'm just like, and he had wonderful teachers. If any of them are watching, I'm certainly not saying that. This isn't about bad teaching versus good teaching. This is just, you don't know until you know. And we don't all know everything at the same level. And so I loved my son's teachers. They loved him, and it was wonderful. But I just can't help thinking of him in this situation and how he would have thrived.
Right. Yeah. And just kind of what sparked into my mind when you were talking about that is building rapport with our students. So when our students are successful and we're the ones there with them when they're successful, they correlate that. You're building a rapport, you're building a relationship. And I think there's a huge push right now in education on building relationships. So if we're giving our students opportunities to be successful and we're the person that's right there with them while they're successful, encouraging them, giving them those high fives, telling them they're doing a great job, we're building rapport and respect, which is only going to help further their education because they're going to know they're with someone that they can trust and that appreciates what they're doing. So that's just another benefit of errorless learning that, I've seen happen over the years. So then these next two kind of go into some functional or maybe life skill concepts. The first one there, you see a student sitting, it's a file folder that is actually a cookie sheet, and they put cookies onto the sheet. So I loved this because if I was going to do, say, a cooking activity in my classroom during that week, I'd have my students practice that skill by using this material because, yes, it's not real cookie dough. No, it's not a real sheet. But that process of moving the cookie on, thinking about your spacing, making sure they're not next to each other, so many teaching opportunities you can get from that. But we're practicing it in an errorless way, meaning all their pieces are cookies. So they can't get it wrong. But if I really wanted to, could I throw a picture of a spider in there and then talk about food safety and be like, well, we really want to make sure there's no bugs on the tray, or we want to make sure we didn't put a piece of broccoli on there by accident. So there's tons of ways to kind of branch out from there. But I loved the concept of doing something like this in more of a life skills or functional way. And kids, I'll tell you, that was like the most used file folder in my classroom. They loved sticking the cookies on the cookie sheet. They just loved it. And then the next one there is actually task cards that I'm sure many of you are familiar with the concept of using a task card, maybe more so in a digital form this past school year, but also the printable form. And typically what you see is, the 3 answers at the bottom. Well, for this, there's only one answer because there's only the right answer on here. So this is for safety or community signs, a student being able to see that it's a crosswalk picture. Again, like I said, with the alphabet file folder from earlier, you could have them identify it if you needed them to kind of bump it up a little bit. You could have them describe what the sign means. Well, this is a sign that you see when it's safe, that you need to be mindful that there might be someone crossing the street near you, and kind of, if they have that vocabulary, build on that. Or you're also working, if you can see there in the picture, there's clothespins. So they're working on the fine motor skill on just clipping it onto the right place on the card. And if they can't do that fine motor skill, I would actually hold the card up and just have the student tap the answer with their finger. So there's lots of different ways. I've seen people use dry erase markers, magnets on a cookie sheet so that it magnetizes, lots of different ways to use those as well. But love that this had that functional concept of the community signs, which I know a lot of us are trying to make sure we incorporate in our classrooms.
Love it.
So we kind of got into this a little bit, but I often hear from teachers when I'm telling them that they should try errorless learning in their classroom, kind of well, what's next? So they master it errorlessly, but then what should I do? How do I move on from that? And I'll be honest, when I first started using the skill myself, I kind of wondered the same thing. How do you transfer or move on from that? environment of them always getting that answer right to, okay, now we have to try and throw a few more outliers in there. So the biggest thing we want to work on is fading those prompts. So if you are using prompts with the student, before you change over and stop teaching that skill errorlessly or allowing the student to complete it errorlessly, you want to make sure you've faded all of your prompts out, meaning they are doing it completely independently as much as they can on their own. And that obviously is a team decision. You might have a student that you know that you have to provide a visual prompt in order to keep them working. And as a team, you know you just aren't ready to fade that out yet, then you can make that decision to move forward. But I strongly suggest trying to fade as much of the prompting out as you can, because our ultimate goal in everything our students are doing is to be independent in something. So make sure that you're trying to fade those prompts out. And then you can add 1 or 2 items, like I talked about before, that is a wrong answer. Not a huge array, not a ton, like even that 50-50, to start. Is it this one or this one? Give them, the best chance for success from there. Don't throw 10 answers out and say, okay, I need you to find the letter A. Only put A and B out. Don't put A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Think about, they're used to always getting the answer right. And my other suggestion with that too is maybe you rotate. So you teach it with the outlier and you do one set that way. So find the letter A. They hold up the letter A. They get it right. You put it back down, then only have the letter A out. Go back to that errorless learning that they're used to. Kind of mix that back in, almost kind of doing that 80-20. 80% of the time, then maybe they're doing it errorlessly. 20% of the time, you're throwing an outlier in when they're practicing that skill over that period of time. So if I have 10 flashcards, 8 of them would still be errorless. 2 of them would be with the outlier answer on there as well, maybe a 50-50 choice. And then you can bump it up from there as you see them being successful. All right. Well, I've got some freebies for you all. Hopefully, Kara, it's okay to move along to that topic.
Yes, it's perfect. We have 3 minutes left.
Okay, great. So what I have exclusively for you guys, I'm not giving this to anybody anywhere else, is a set of errorless file folders. So you saw some of that with the cookie sheet. I have some fun new ones on here that I have not had before. You can see in the picture there, there's putting books on a shelf. I believe I have one that's like a Ziploc baggie and they have to put the goldfish inside. So a bunch of different ones in there for you to start practicing using errorless materials in your classroom. And as long as the students are moving those pieces over to the board, they're getting it right. So that's, again, that errorless concept that I've been talking about during this session. And then I had for you, if you wanted a little bit more, I have on my website, I have my email list where you can sign up there and get access to over 40 free resources. And the 3 that I have pictured here are errorless. So I have some other errorless file folders, some for numbers. So you can see there the number 0, and then all the answers are 0. So you're teaching some of those academic concepts we talked about. I have some seasonal ones that are more fun, that just have some different items that you might see in a different season, like a snowman for the winter one, a pumpkin for the fall. And then I actually have a digital file folder. So that's actually a set of boom cards, but it looks like a file folder. And the students have to drag the pieces that you might have in your backyard. There's like a playground, a sandbox, a tree, a picnic table. And that's just a way to add digital to that errorless learning.
Yeah, I was wondering, I was thinking as you were going, I was like, oh my gosh, how did you do this during pandemic teaching? Like everything had to become virtual and so much more difficult to create, I suppose, or starting over.
Yeah, so you have to think outside the box a little bit. So that was definitely something I was like, you know what? Why can't I just do the same thing? Just make it digital. So I've done that. And I actually also have, if anybody would be interested, I do have errorless task cards that are digital that you can get through Boom, Google Slides, things like that as well. Because again, we all had to kind of go to that digital thing. So I totally get where everybody's coming from with that.
I think people will be excited to opt into that. So I'm just super happy that I was able to find you and get you featured here. And the learning has been fantastic. Thank you so much for your generosity and sharing your time and your materials with the audience. And Jen has up here all the ways you can find her. That will also be linked on the speaker page where you found this video. So you'll be able to click to follow her and click to get those free gifts she talked about and go practice errorless learning. It's errorless on the speaker page because there's only one place to click to get it, right?
There you go. Yep. We made it errorless.
Mess it up. Choose a button. It'll be beautiful.
You got it.